2, chapter number 2, whatever you want to call it, second part of this thing. Now, I know it's going to be a little bit hectic in the background, so I do apologize for that, but let's get started because this is the story of time, all right? I know we left off with the Holy Trinity, being able to understand how I-O comes together to give us the pattern of the matrix, which gives us the culmination of life, which ultimately becomes what it is that we are currently experiencing. And you need to understand that because you cannot break what is the pattern of the matrix. It's that simple. So with that being said, let's get into, as you can see, a little bit more to continue on that story. Now, this is not to say that this is the start of the human origins, but this is the start of the story that we are currently being told, because there is, quote unquote, this book that is being used to give us guidance of what is going to happen piece by piece. And so many people are saying this is crazy, you can't use a book to predict the future. Others would say, yeah, you can use these quote unquote statements to reflect what is going on in real life, and that's incredible, right? But what we got to look at is how do we as people come together to be able to move forward and also give respect to what has happened, because there is an illusion, and I'll break it down. There is a perception that is being created by those that want to control your lifestyle, that want to control your attention, and that's what this is about. Remember, where you place your attention determines your ability to use your free will. Because if you use your attention to do things that don't bring you joy, then you will suffer from the lack of dopamine, which will cause you to then pursue what is called these negative reoccurring cycles. And so we don't want to go into those negative cycles. We want to go into positive cycles. But what we first have to understand that in 1727 BC, Babylon was created, all right? Now, yeah, it fell to the Persians, but as you can see, we had a transitions from the Persians to the Hindu, to the Buddha, to Egypt, to Rome, to the Spanish and the Portuguese, to Britain, and then to the USA, to where we are today. So this is many, many generations later. Some may say this is the 11th or 12th generation. So what we're saying here is that there is a story of time that's being told, because this is the story of how we all, quote unquote, as a world came to agreement on what time it is, what day it is, because it's that simple. You have to see it as a global agreement of what it is that time stands for, because if you don't break out of the paradigm of time, the idea of time, if you live within time, that means that you are living within their construct, because it is their ability to create these regulations or contracts to participate in agreements of how the world is created. And if you don't take the time to do your own research to understand why certain things are the way they are, then obviously you won't understand the current structure of the world. And so when we think about time zones, when we think about daylight time savings, or when we think about different calendars, we have to understand that this entire story has been told in order to be able to control what is humans' ability to produce or grow agriculture crops according to the solar or lunar cycles. This is the most important thing, guys. There are groups of people who believe that they should follow the lunar calendar. There's groups of people that believe that they should follow the solar calendar. And these are two different things. As far as my awareness has explained to me, or things have been able to come into my awareness, anything that has to do with solar calendars is for the cultivation of crops. Crops means that you can build capital around that, because this requires you to be able to produce, manufacture, ship, trade, all those things, right? This is all about the production of crops. Now, on the other side, to me, health is found on the lunar calendar. Lunar calendars explain to you the synchronization of you to the quote-unquote cosmos through this medium, or the quote-unquote the other light. You have one light, which is the sun, one light, which is the moon. And the better you understand these calendars, the easier it'll be to understand this big story that we're being told, but we are currently living such a small piece of it. And so it really puts us in a position where if you don't do the research, you'll be misunderstanding the entire paradigm of what we are going through. because this is a global agreement for change that cannot be stopped, but has been written about because someone, I don't know how, they know this stuff. But what we do know is that there are what's called clairvoyants. And clairvoyants are those that are able to access the Akashic records. These clairvoyants are individuals who have superior spiritual, psychological intellect, who have the ability to connect with energies and the ability to interact with the astral plane. And these are individuals that can see the residue of energy that has been left behind through the generations of quote unquote individuals that have lived on earth. This is incredible because they also have access to the records of everything, the Akashic records. And so this is incredible, right? When we have clairvoyants that are able to look into these quote unquote realms of infinite knowledge. And knowledge is what has given humans the ability to move forward and develop further methods of cultivation, agriculture, immunization, transport, community, markets, all these things. And it's really important that we come together to really understand at the core what it really starts at, because once again, the pattern of the matrix cannot be broken. If it is, then we are going against quote unquote sources creation. And remember, creation was made upon a perfect algorithm. If we as quote unquote humans try to come in and disrupt that perfect algorithm in order to conserve energy, then what we are doing here is disregarding what is nature's proper order. Then you have to see it as we are here to participate and collaborate, not to disrupt. And that is where we begin to go ahead and have this conflict between ideas, between peoples, because some individuals choose authority, some others in control choose power, and so others choose deceit, others choose to blackmail. And so what we need to do is understand that as humanity has tried its best to come together as one, we've suffered through multiple inconveniences, or some may say moments of being lied to, because we just cannot see outside of our current local maybe focus or awareness. And so you as the individual receiving this information, I am asking you to go ahead and put yourself in a position of now being able to look beyond the local or the state awareness of perception and enter a new realm of perception where you try to look at this multi-dimensional timeline where it's like generation after generation after generation after generation, as you can see, that has built this story up. And so as we keep going forward, we have to understand that there is this entire paradigm that has been built upon us for many, many years. And so whatever was in charge either was really smart, or this is just how humanity goes about things, right? So we can say either it was pre-planned because this book said it was, which is incredible to me, right? It illustrates the ability of some kind of awareness, knowing beforehand what will be. And so if this is to be the case, well, it brings up so many other questions, right? And so a lot of these things I've pondered on my entire life, and trust me when I say I'm going to give you so much information, I think you're going to be very excited. But first, we should begin with a simple question, all right? So let's look at this and ask ourselves. These statements here have a certain quote-unquote abbreviation next to it, and these abbreviations have to be understood. We have before Common Era, before Christ, Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord, and then we have Common Era. And what we need to understand is, okay, well, where did these come from? Who gave these quote-unquote names or quote-unquote abbreviations? Who gave them their quote-unquote respective value? And this respective value comes from Dionysius in 525 AD. He was a historian who was working for the papacy, and he said, look, I believe that this is how we should go ahead and redefine the starting point of humanity and quote-unquote time at this. When I say humanity, I mean time. The story that we're going to tell humanity, because they want everybody to be in congruence or in agreement of what it is that is point zero to move forward, right? Point zero, we move forward. Hey, that makes sense. We move forward. But to do so would mean that that story has more authority than another story. And remember, this is the story of the SU, I'm sorry, S-O-N. The S-O-N is also another way of saying S-U-N, the sun. And the sun will rise again every day. And so you have to learn the story of the sun, because as I tell you the story of the sun, you will learn that as he sat at the tomb for 3 days, once again, that is because there was a change of calendars. They are telling us the story of these transitions of calendars of time, because what you need to understand is how it all began, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and start at the point where, quote unquote, we create year one, because if we don't understand year one, then we don't understand anything beforehand or ahead of that. And so we're going to try to define this as best as possible. Now, as far as my knowledge goes, I want to make this a fun experience for you. So make sure you take a second to yourself to take notes or whatever you need to do. And let's go ahead and really get down to what it is. I'm not coming across to cross any lines. I just want to express to you what I came across in my knowledge or my research in order to give you a better idea of what I believe is going on, so that that way you can understand what I mean when I tell you what type of investments I'm doing. Because the way I structure my investments is very much aligned with the entire structure of how the world is moving. Because if you could see these opportunities, then you would also jump in. And so I recommend not that you follow what I say blindly, but that you do your own research. And like I said before, my investments are how I feel that I could best store my energy for future returns, not for immediate returns. And so if that's what you're looking for, I'm not your guy. I'm doing research here to learn how to participate in these markets in a way where hopefully my future legacy will be able to benefit from these. Because I know that with my own 24 hours, I'm able to earn my own wealth. And hopefully, if I do the right things, just like I hope that you do, then we will both be in a comfortable place down the road, understanding that there is a constant devaluation of the currency in this generational moment. And so what we have to do is understand how we got here so that we can make a decision as to how to go forward from here. So you ready? This is going to be good, guys. Oh, man. All right. So it's quite simple, actually. It just took a long time to be able to figure this out, which is why I've been away for so long. But it's funny when you look at it from a big picture, right? Let's get away from everything else. Now that you understand these denominations and how it means to kind of name each year, because the most important thing that you do is you got to track what you do and when you do it, right? So let's say that I work out. Well, I got to track the dates. And if I work out, I want to make sure that I start with, quote unquote, let's say 8 weeks. And if I'm going to work out for 8 weeks, I want to make sure that these 8 weeks are tracked well, you know. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to track it one by one, day by day. But you see, these are advantages that you and I have as, quote unquote, civilized humans who have records of keeping time, or methods of tracking time that are precise down to less than 26 seconds. Now, the idea here is that individuals that came before us arrived at this logic somehow. And it's time to discuss that logic, because if you can understand the logic, you can understand the story of time, giving you more control of what it is to be self-governed. Because at the end of the day, this is once again a war on consciousness. However, we are transitioning into the Great Awakening. So therefore, you have the opportunity to surround yourself with leaders that bring your awareness up to speed so that you can make the best decisions without having to spend so much time doing the research. That's my goal. Let's move forward. So as you see, whenever we come across this, what's called timeline, we have the Tower of Babel, which once again fell to the Persians. And this created what is called the occult knowledge of sound and light, vibration, frequency, and harmonics. All of this stuff is really, really important, right? But then there was those that fell upon not knowing how to read, not knowing the language, all those things. And these guys were the ones that were easy to manipulate, right? And so these people got manipulated, they fell into governance, and now that they're in governance, they have a government, and this government they trust. And in this government that they trust, quote unquote, individuals are going to experience certain emotions. It's just what it is. So, as individuals in these establishments, whether it's, once again, it could be Africa, it could be Europe, it could be America, it could be China, it could be India. It could go ahead and be anywhere. Now, remember that all these individuals are growing at the same time, simultaneously, right? Did I miss anybody? China, Canada? I think I'm going to be happy with that for right now. In case of anything, I'm going to say Middle East. Middle East, yeah. So we have all these things, right? Because this, I'm talking about, this is the bottom part of Africa, this is the middle part of Africa, connecting all its way into Europe, and then you have Europe, and then you have China, and then you have America, right? And so we have all these different things. These are all happening at the same time. So when we look at these things, I want you to always think about this simultaneously, because what you have to remember is that first we have to come to an agreement of time, a date. And then, in order for all of us to quote unquote fall in line, we have to have an image of an identity, right? So identity, and I'll get to that. And so we had an image. And these are the two things that we have agreed to so far. Now remember, the third thing is going to cost us, I mean, once you get three, that's 3 strikes, bro. Like, we're not doing too good, right? So you got to look at it like this. We're in Rome. Now, how did Rome get built? And this is a great story that happened in 753 BC. I want you to think, 753 BC. That means before Christ. So this was established before Christ. Now, what happens is that they were the ones that created, quote unquote, Christ. Year 1, year 0, the image of Christ, all these things. So we're going to hang out right here for a little bit. Before we go forward, all this thing, this is kind of like this whole idea of what we're talking about, right? Like this whole idea, and when I said they created Christ, they created the image, right? Because what they did is they started to create these different practices of, quote unquote, being able to praise a, quote unquote, single God, which was, quote unquote, the sun, because we are operating in a solar calendar manner. Now, Catholics and Christians operate under the same idea, right? That we're operating under the agricultural calendar. Why is that? Well, you see, the first calendar was created by the Kingdom of Rome, which was basically started by these 2 brothers. And basically, one was a demigod and one wasn't. And so obviously, you can see how the story goes. Demigod kills the younger brother, or the other brother, I'm sorry, in order to be able to go ahead and name the city after himself. Great. So, demigod kills brother. Demigod names city after himself. We have Rome. Rome is now running as a kingdom, because remember, the story of Rome is long. Rome was a kingdom, then a republic, and then we have an empire. And now we have what's called the city of Rome, or the Vatican City. I'm sorry, Vatican City. Because Rome and Vatican City are 2 completely different things. You need to understand that, because if you don't, oh, you're going to love that story. But long story short, here, we're going to go ahead and focus on this. We want to go back to the idea that once the kingdom was established, there needed to be a form of operating for time to be able to grow accordingly for everybody. So the first calendar was created. It only had 304 days. So it wasn't going to work out because there was many inconsistencies. There were 61 days that were just left up in the air because, well, just whatever. And so the idea here, the next ruler of that emperor, I'm going to look into that story a little bit more to give you a little bit more story on how they transitioned and how he died. But as you can see, there was a long gap between 753 BC and the end of the 1500s and the start of the new calendar, which is, in this case, the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. And so we're going to be discussing that because there has been a big disagreement, quote unquote, because there's 40 different types of calendars that we've used. And currently, Ethiopia is running on a different calendar than the Julian and Gregorian calendar. So we're going to talk about the why, how we got there, and why there's a discrepancy on how we track time. Because if you don't understand the story of time, I'm telling you, you're going to really regret it. As we move forward, you need to also understand that as we see this transition through the ages, at the Tower of Babel, it was all about the language. Once again, what is the language that we got misled? Well, it's from one person to a group. And what is a group? The Holy Trinity. You have the Holy Trinity. We know this. We know this. You can see it in either way that you want. You have the Holy Trinity. This entire thing is all about the pattern of the matrix. And if you can understand that, some did, some didn't. Some wanted to manipulate it. We're not going to say who right now, but we're going to go into the story. And so what we have is these different groups of people that break off from this. Some that want to go ahead and, once again, we have these two things where it's like solar or lunar. You think about that, all right? And then we break apart, which is authority roles. And so these roles of authority are being really, really imposed here. And they were superimposed here with the pharaohs and the obelisk being coming into play, because all these different artifacts that were created in the world were being used to kind of praise these quote-unquote gods, right? So we got symbolism. And so we have the idea of the transition from language to this idea of knowledge, to this idea of authority, to this idea of employment or structure of communities, right? And so this whole symbolism of how the gods ruled occurred from 3100 BCE to 30 BCE, before current era, before common era. Now remember, common era here, before common era, that means that there was a point when common era started. So common era and obviously in the year of the Lord are the same thing. This is year zero, quote unquote. So we're going to put year zero there. And as you can see, there is this timeline and a little zero. Do you see how we get to these points of quote unquote subconscious or underlying just little intricacies of our life that require us to praise and do rituals of ones and zeros? Everything is a ritual to what it is. Ones and zeros is what runs the world. We count everything in ones and zeros. So how many fingers we have? 10. All right. There we go. How many toes you have? 10. All right. There you go. So as we move forward, you have to understand what is going on, because if you don't, then you can't come to terms with what has been agreed to for many generations before you even arrived. So if you don't understand what has been agreed to for generations before you arrived, how could you go ahead and say that you want to participate in what's currently going on? That is to say that you are not understanding the language, the history, or the structure, let alone the rules of the game. So let's talk about them. Look, the game is complicated. I get it. It's been manipulated for many years in many different continents. And now we have people traveling everywhere. And then everywhere has caused this situation where now we have this pandemic. And that's okay, because guess what? It's okay. It has led us to a transition of how we see the world and what we define as important, right? We have to look at our values. We have to look at our trade. We have to look at our business structure. We have to look at what we define as energy important or energy efficient. And so all these things have to be reevaluated. But the thing that most people don't seem to understand is that these things have already been agreed to, because there are parties that are already looking into the future, working on their own agenda, and what we are just basically following their pace. And if you don't do your own research, you're basically susceptible to being caught off guard, because you thought things were going this way, but they're really going that way, and the world is actually moving this way, and now these guys are building that way because they're trying to go ahead and catch it ahead. And that's all this is. That's why they invested in Bitcoin before you trusted it. That's why they got out when you were barely getting in, trusting it. At the top, they sold off. That's why there's a top, because they sold off. They're the major holders. And you need to understand it, because the way that this all works, the stock market, Bitcoin, USDT, and the US dollar, and it all works very, very harmonically, quote unquote, sound. But the truth is, it's breaking apart. And if you can go ahead and learn to spot the holes, we can go ahead and put our dollars in those positions before they blow up. Or more importantly, you can stack your pennies next to the millionaires' dollars, so that way you can understand how to move forward and how to help your family get out of its situation. Because that's the idea here. With information, you could achieve it, new positions, and with that new information, you should find a way to bring others up to your current position so that you can exit your position and start a new role. And if you don't understand that, then this is the problem here, right? Because understanding the way things were and knowing how to act are two different things. And today, all we're doing here is talking about the breakdown of how we created time and agreement created by how we chose to impose calendars in order to be able to minimize the discrepancies of how many of synchronicity between countries and states and people. Because if we want to track the sun properly in order to grow crops accordingly and able to run trade properly in order to start workers at the right time, we have to create time zones. We have to, not only that, we have to create these delegations of responsibilities, and more importantly, we have to understand that each calendar was itself an innovation of the prior. And so when we look at the Julian calendar, we have to look at it and say, yes, it was good. It had 11 minutes of discrepancy between itself over 400 years. Every 400-year cycle had an 11-minute discrepancy. So what they did when the Gregorian calendar was imposed was that it minimized that to a 26-second discrepancy. So let's run that story down, because as we start to learn that we had to adjust this, Pope Gregory the 13th was able to correct it with a 10-day jump forward, right, in 1582. So wait a second. Does that mean that Rome was in place from the kingdom of Rome in 753 BC, and then it was still in place in was it called 1582? Yeah. And so there's a big transitional period there. It's kind of scary. And so there's a lot of history there, and we're going to have to cover that one of these days. But for right now, what we have to understand is that the rise of Rome gave birth to the Vatican, right? Because through the manipulation of law, anything could be done. And so you have to learn to understand legalese, is the way I think most of us call it, right? Where you have this idea of how law works, but you don't really understand how it works until you look inside of the Vatican law, and then you start to look at our current system of law. So this is where this is all going, because I myself have been studying religiously the last and the most important 100 cases of the Supreme Court of the United States, so that way I can explain to you a little better what is going on now. But I want to explain to you how we got here through the quote-unquote agreement of what time to operate in, or what time terms or what time stamp to operate in. Because as we go ahead and look at things in the 13th and 14th century, the astronomer, Aloysius Lilius, was able to understand that, every 400 years, if we sustain it operating under the Julian calendar, we would see an issue. And in order to solve this issue, he said there should be no more than 97 leap years every 400 years. Okay, beautiful. So he came up with some rules, gave us a couple defining terms within those terms, and then all of a sudden, boom, we have the story of time. But the Pope wasn't happy, so what we've done is that we basically moved this, but now the person that changed it, the Pope, he came into place because of Emperor Augustus. Now, when he came into place, he wanted to put the Julian calendar into place, so he added the July month, and then he added August. As you can see, Emperor Augustus, August. And then as we move forward, now we have the, agreement to operate on a brand new adjusted worldwide calendar that should be imposed on everybody. And so there is a story of how everybody jumped on board. And so what happened was, yes, we switched to this brand new calendar on October 1582, but because you have to think of it, there wasn't the type of technology that we have today to record something, send it out, and impose it on everybody. And that's what they've been trying to create ever since. The ability to impose a law on everybody from then on. Because remember, 1611, citizenship was created. And this is 1582. And what we're seeing here is that without the proper structure, these quote-unquote regulations cannot be imposed on the civilization. Because if you want to be civil, it requires a civil code. And we're going to get to that. A civil code tells you how to operate, right? Well, you need to know how to operate in this quote-unquote game so that you can get ahead. And that's what I aspire to do by breaking these things down, because as we move forward, October 15th, by the way, that's my mom's birthday. Congratulations to her. That's super cool that it happened then. You know, the Papal States were the only ones that enforced these type of quote-unquote measures. That means the calendar was not changed for everybody else worldwide. Remember, big world, small dominance, new regulation, quote-unquote, in order to impose proper worldwide calculations. You have to see it. Math runs everything. And the ability to synchronize ourselves as a global structure to the nuclear nanosecond, how the sun aligns itself and the moon align itself. This helps us determine the entire infrastructure of what commerce is. Remember, trade and commerce, trade finance or trade financial commerce, all running through XDC. This is why this is major, guys, because if you understand the delicacy and the intricacy and the sensitivity of this, then you will understand how to move forward, because the story is just getting good here. As we go ahead and recognize that these places like France, Portugal, Poland, and Spain did not agree because they were not Catholic, how can they go ahead and accept their decree? Well, you know what? It took some time. They did some convincing, some fighting, and all that good stuff. And then once again, they did not want, the people in Greece and Russia also did not want to hear from the Church of the Catholics. So, you know, it's kind of tough right there. There's Presbyterians, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, this creates a bunch of issues that they're trying to impose this new measurement of time across these different groups of people, and each one has an issue with accepting it. So what you got to realize now, where we're at today, you should be grateful that everybody's quote unquote in agreement with it, but there's really on the background, there's this big discrepancy on how we treat each other and how we relate with each other, because we just don't understand the proper story of how humanity is trying to piece itself back together, leveraging technology once again, because that's what the next story is all about. Next chapter, we're going to discuss the occult technology that has been developed through the ages. And we're going to break that down in a bit, but for right now, if you can see what's going on, the church has developed this new decree of being able to say, only this papal decree, that says, yes, we're going to impose the Julian calendar, and then all of a sudden the Gregorian calendar, and then all of a sudden we got to get everybody to agree on it. And as we move forward, England, Sweden, and obviously all these other places, these were the Protestants. These were not, dang, I got to go ahead and research that one a little bit more, and I apologize, it skipped my head. But the idea is that many, many years went on before everybody accepted it. So for every year that took for people to accept it, they had to add an extra quote-unquote day to adjust, right? So if they accepted the new calendar in the 1500s, it was 10 days. If they accepted it in the 1700s, it was 11 days move forward. If they accepted it in the 1800s, 12 days forward. In the 1900s, 13 days forward. If they accepted it in the 2000s, it was 14 days forward. And so you may be asking yourself, well, who hasn't accepted it? Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had not accepted it. All right, and so we are still in a place where many places, and Ethiopia, many places still have come to terms with the quote-unquote agreeing to the story that they're trying to impose on us on how time operates. Now, once we get past this quote-unquote idea that we understand what's going on, we don't understand what's going on. You know, it's just what it is. We don't understand it. There's this big story, and we have to piece it together. So we're trying to condense it as much as possible for you. So here's what you need to know. As it goes on, we need to understand that this whole thing, you ready for the biggest illusion ever, started in Italy and Rome. Because we have to think, okay, well, if they have papal decree, well, who gave them that right? Well, here's where it happened. There was a quote-unquote agreement between Italy and Rome to create this protection around the Vatican in order so that nobody could ever attack it, right? And so what happened was they created this agreement without anybody knowing, and this agreement was called the Lateral Treaty, Lateran Treaty. All right, now the Lateran Treaty, and obviously when Italy and Rome created this agreement, happened just maybe simultaneously without any coincidence, because at the same time the 1929 crash happened. All of a sudden, what's going on? Well, emperor from what's it called, Ethiopia, his name is Haile Selassie. He was trying to, and I apologize if I butchered that, I don't mean to just offend anybody. Haile Selassie, he ended up being king of kings, and very well respected amongst the African nations. And so what ended up happening was that because he wanted to go ahead and actually talk to the white man, he was perceived as to be an equal, right? So he felt that, yes, these people respect me as an equal. He walked around and showed them who the boss was. Obviously, his story is a fantastic one. If you get a chance to research it, I recommend it. Now, what happened here is that at the time that this is all going on, we have this transit. This is 1929, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hold off on that, because before I get there, I want to go ahead and establish that, yes, Italy and Rome had come up with an agreement to let the Pope become ruler of the church and state of the Vatican, which, once again, this church and state of the Vatican has its own military, has its own ability to own property, own governance in corporations, and it is operating under a corporate structure of the Holy See. And so now we see that they're taking advantage of this corporate law that has been created. So we're going to get there in a bit. The corporate law here, the Vatican was created in 1506. So remember, this is entering the 1500s. And entering the 1500s, we are now being imposed with the language of the Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians operate in such a way where there is a hierarchy to the Vatican. And so we should understand it as well, where if you want to become the Pope, you have to become a priest, and then a cardinal, and then a bishop, and then you become a Pope, quote unquote, if you are selected by doing, quote unquote, whatever gets you the rights or the, quote unquote, respect it. Now, respect, as we have learned to understand, also requires you to go ahead and do things that most of us would not do. And many of these individuals practice things that we would not practice ourselves, all with the, quote unquote, intention of selling us on the idea of salvation. So now they've created two businesses, and I want to bring them to light. Oh man, they're good. They're good. Business of birth or life. Now, and once again, oh yeah, salvation. Forgot where we were. So they've created this business where every time you come in, you become a product. And so your entire life, you follow what is called a path that will lead you to salvation. And if you ever feel like you're not living down that path, quote unquote, you're not living your purpose, therefore you will not be saved, therefore you're going to be in damnation. Now, damnation is something that we should all discuss. Salvation is something we should all discuss. But the idea here right now that I'm trying to get across is how they made a business out of hope. And so hope is what I'm really talking about here, because it determines how you live your life. And so salvation, at the end of the road, if you go ahead and give money to the church, you are a good person. So they are attacking your subconscious, telling you that this thing here is important, and they are attacking not your conscious, because that's how you're going to give them money. That's the action of giving. But then your subconscious is that you give money power. And then the last thing is your unconscious believes in a God that looks like something that you've seen before. It's the image of God, but really it's Caesar Borgia, which is just the individual that was painted the day that one of these popes decided to go ahead and use Michelangelo to paint the image of who they believe should be the face of God. Look, this goes deep, guys. And so when I say these things, it's because I've spent countless of hours looking into it, trying to validate both sides of the story, and I've arrived in a lot of good places. Because the more that I do the research, the more I give myself the peace of mind to understand that it's not that God does not exist. G with a lowercase o, with a lowercase g does not exist. G-O-D exists with a capital G, if you want to think of it that way. Because remember, we are not here to succumb to anybody, to give up our authority, our sovereignty to anybody. We are here to become self-governed. And to become that is to recognize what it is and what it's not. It's just what it is. And so as we move forward, learning that Italy and Rome created a pope or a corporation called the Vatican, which can control its own church and state and law. And the way that they impose law on us is this called the New Roman Empire. So this New Roman Empire, where did I put that? So I can give you the exact name. I forget where I put that. Oh man. I think I put it here somewhere. Oh yep, that's somewhere here though. Oh man, so many things. Oh yep, New Roman Empire, right there. See, sorry about that. It took me a second. There's so much information in my head right now. But the idea is Mussolini, when he was running Italy, he made an agreement with the papacy in 1929 to basically create a new Roman Empire that was going to go ahead and be financed by obviously individuals who had access to guns and money. And so they were going to go ahead and do what with it? Well, the plan was simple. They were going to go against Ethiopia. And against Ethiopia in order to be able to then impose all these different type of structures and laws on them. And so the idea here was to acquire land from Ethiopia. Great, so they had a plan to be able to impose Italy's and Vatican's doctrine on the world. And so that way they could create a brand new army to rule in order to then be able to, once again, profit from it. Because if you create expansion of new markets, once again, if you take over the African market or the Ethiopian market in this case, you're allowing yourself to indoctrinate or to impose a certain idea, which going back to it, since birth, people have become products, because that's what religion does, right? When you impose yourself to a specific religion that gives you a specific citizenship, you are now on board what is called the maritime law. And so when you are given birth to, you become a product. That product has a tracking number on the ship. The ship is what? America. This is the mother ship. America is taking us all on this journey, this great trip. And hopefully, if you follow the rules of religion, you will find salvation. That's what they tell you. And if you don't, just pray. And so what's happening here is that your unconscious has been manipulated to praise something that has a color and a quote-unquote identity or a characteristic of what it looks like. So now you can be easily manipulated because you can relate your mind to a color, giving immediate authority over the rest. But there are so many proofs in Egypt that Jesus or Christ was black, right? So proof that Jesus was black. So this is where the story gets awkward, right? Because there is a discrepancy and an imposing of a truth upon people. Rome is in Europe. Egypt is obviously not near the white people, right? So the color changes the perception of the individuals. And so the truth is easier to impose when the language is different. And if there is a military that can govern certain things, well, then obviously force determines beliefs as well. And so now we are arriving at a point where, because we have a new calendar, we can continue the Great Reset, which has been an agenda that's been long in the process of being done. And so this is why when we think of these things, we have to really understand, are we being taken on a journey that we don't understand and we complain about? Because that's what it feels like when you're just thinking on a a localized perspective or a specific private perspective. If you're just complaining about your current position, but you don't take the time to research into the previous generations, then you're really withholding your own self from information that can give you the tools to act with more confidence. And so as we keep looking into how was this world of ours created, we have to see that this deal that was created by Italy, and to give birth to the Vatican, and so they have this quote unquote Vatican law, canon law, that was leveraged by the Spanish and the Portuguese to acquire what is called papal decree again, to acquire ownership of the world. Whoa. Drink to that. So to acquire ownership of the world was the goal. And so what they were doing is that the kings from the French and obviously the Spanish and the Portuguese and Italian were funding these things. And all these things are being done using religion. What is religion? Well, once again, you have a method of these popes being selected so that way there's succession. so that each year or every time that somebody dies, remember, they have to operate at the human lifetime cycle structure. So every time that somebody dies, there must be a certain way of transitioning ownership, authority, basically information. And this documenting of information is all kept underground of the Vatican. And so all this information is secret from the secret files that they have there, because they have secret information and public information, but it's miles, thousands of miles long. So there's a lot of information being held at the Vatican that most people don't know about, like the transitionary periods from how it was protected from World War I and World War II. As we keep moving into these things, we have to understand that all of these things are just looking for a way of trying to tell us one thing. All these religions, not things, but religions are trying to tell us one thing. They're trying to tell us information. And information is kept in stories. And these stories are kept in books. And if these books can last eternity, the better. Now what's happening is the number of books has been manipulated, because the true number of books should be 666. That's the truth. But our books have less than that. And there is this transition from here to here where we've lost a lot of the information that would give us the true information of what is the world according to the Word. Now, that is, if the Word was to be the true way of the Word. To have full faith in what somebody else wrote means that you are voluntarily, just because you've been thrown into this world and pre-programmed, because this is how they operate, if you choose to not question and just follow, then you are voluntarily giving up everything that is your divine right. And so we have to start thinking of how it is that it came to be what it is today. This transition of power, ideas, concepts of identity. And once again, we have spiritualism to thank for that. Because the idea of spiritualism gives us the idea that there is something further in the beyond if we are able to connect to nature. Now, the Buddha is always used representing not only, I'm sorry here, it just slipped my mind. The flower. I'm trying to think of what flower. Give me 2 seconds. Alright, y'all gonna hate me because I forgot it, but it was the lotus flower, and I apologize. But the lotus flower, right? And we have the lotus flower and the snake, actually, which most people don't really like to recognize, that the snake has always played a big part here. And the snake is multiple things, but snake, serpent, it's actually what the Vatican means. Vatican, the etymology of the Vatican is actually the serpent. So when we look at it, we have the Vatican, which is the serpent or the dragon. And then in February 11, 1929, that's when it officially became the Holy See, given the governance of the Roman Catholic Church. Look, guys, it may seem like this all happened a long, long time ago. It didn't. It didn't. It's less than 2 generations ago. But what happened was that our generation suffered tremendously, or previous generations, suffered tremendously because of the financial crash, which caused a disruption in their perception of what is going on at the global level and caused attention to be derived back to the local household, because now there was an issue at the financial stability level, because we went through these years of splurging, right, since we've had the opportunity to get back into these ecosystems from the 1700s. We've built it up, we've earned it, we've broken away, and all of a sudden there's this big collapse here, where this collapse really was just a way to shift people's attention from understanding that we were now going to be transitioning to a new quote-unquote world. It didn't just happen when the Spanish and the French were funding exploration over here, and the Portuguese, but what happened was that started the thought process of the elite on how to govern the new world. You got to think like the elites at the time that this happened, so that you can position yourself in a way where you can kind of not be upset at it, but just try to work with it. Now, if you could work with it, you could position yourself better and you could profit from it. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to capitalize on the fact that your ignorance is going to allow you to go ahead and sit in the background and not do anything about it. So let's change it. I want to help you become your own bank. And it starts with understanding this. They funded everything at that point. World War I and World War II started being funded once again with these type of intentions. And so I'm going to go ahead and get down more into the transitionary periods of World War I and World War II and all these transitions of power. But if you can understand that in 1929, the crash was a distraction so that Emperor Haile Selassie, he could be betrayed. And so he was betrayed. And so that way, when he perceived himself to be equal to the whites, the one man in Africa who contained the power, who held the power and still did, and he created so many good things for Africans. And you know, the idea here is that as we transition onto the world, he entered the League of Nations. And as he entered the League of Nations, he was asking for collective security, but they betrayed him. What happened was that they voted against him. Everybody was confused. Well, not everybody. He was confused. And he said to them, it is us today, but it will be you tomorrow. And then he hit it off to create the UN and start the new, quote unquote, League of Nations. And so as we see what is going on, there's this big disagreement with how we, as those in the West, have treated those in Africa. And those relationships are still being worked upon. But this is what has caused many of these financial manipulation schemes or tactics, because when we start to look at what is going on from the perspective of, oh, this is all to distract our attention from what's important. Just like, you know, this current situation that just launched upon us in March of 2020 was actually to disclose the situation of what was going on here and many other things. So remember, disclosure of information is so powerful that it must cause a global stir-up in order to shift attention to stuff that doesn't matter in order to keep you away from learning the most important stuff. So if you don't do your research, you're going to be held in the dark. And I promise you, you do not want to miss out on this information that's coming up, because as we keep talking about this unseen war that has happened through the ages, we arrive at a point of where we understand how religion has been used to be able to move humanity from a place of just being born free into a place of labeling humans at the moment of birth in order to give them capital, in order to create a certain amount of volume of printing, up until the point where we broke away from that idea, right? And we started to attach value to gold, and then all of a sudden, now we are in a currency reset. But there is still a black market for humans. So you have to think of it like this. What runs our currency? Is it the dark markets? Is it the need for money? Is it the desire for humans to be able to have more? Or is it that they just are not sure of what it is that they should be utilizing their time in, and the idea of money makes sense? They're sold on that idea. So they pursue that idea. And I always choose to stand in front of this camera with the intention of helping you question, is that really what matters best? You know, because as we see what's going on, we have to understand that this new financial system was imposed on us through Britain. Because what's going on here is that Britain was able to go ahead and really play a huge part in the law, the legislature, the legalities, the structure of maritime law. And so as we learn about this maritime law and we learn how to play the game of navigation of the sea and becoming citizens of these ships, and how we can partake in how to move forward in what is this global economy, well, then we start to understand why it is that certain individuals have placed themselves in power and imposed certain thoughts on us, such as values of trade, business structure, and energy, that are now being, what is that word? There is a huge public intention to disrupt that structure. And so now we create what is called a decentralized government, because those individuals with the awareness and the education and the connections and the capital are willing to do something about it. Because as we keep going, not only are we going to talk about the occult knowledge that there is that we have to discuss, but more importantly, how we have been able to create these various different types of technologies that have popped up in different areas of the world giving us the opportunity to move society forward, to define both astrological and agricultural developments that have caused the rapid growth of humanity. It's not just technology on the screens, but it's actually technology on the back end on how do you feed so many people, because as we keep moving, we understand that language is important, but language is meant to achieve what is called conscious, subconscious, and unconscious enslavement. And I need you to see it for that, what it is. Because if we can take our next step forward from here, understanding that the language has been established from year one, choosing to go ahead and use numbers as the starting point is a global agreement we all choose to make. But do you still make that decision? I ask you now, if you're put in that position, yes, you will go against the grain, but it's just something that you should know about. You don't have to go against it vocally. You could just know about it and stand in your own corner, doing the research, hoping that you discover some new truths that can bring new information to light. And if you learn anything, obviously, feel free to share with me. But stay tuned for chapter number 2. Obviously, chapter number 1 was breaking down the structure of how we arrived here. I'm going to explain a little bit more about World War I, World War II, and the technologies that we've been able to accomplish and acquire because of it, and how it's led us from what it is that we perceived ourselves to be, sticks and rocks, and now we're humans with atomic bombs. So think about that, right? It's mind-blowing. All in a short span of about 500 years, knowing that we are operating on a mathematical equation of how to choose our calendars based upon the astrological position of the sun every 400 years. By minimizing that time gap of solar timing, then we maximize food production and we're able to feed the whole world. It's incredible, guys. I hope I catch you on the next one.